All right, Chav on Zoom, we're still good? Excellent. All right, Shabbos, say good morning, and really exciting and beautiful daf ahead of us today. Beginning by thanking all of our sponsors. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Teves. The daf Yomi Shir for dedicating the Shiurim this month in memory of Mr. Milton Martyr Mordechai David Ben Rafal Cohen. To thank Shirley Elbaum and family for dedicating the Shiurim and Joshua this month, creation of the yard site of Jerry Elbaum, Yaakov Couple Ben Avram Menachem, and to thank our week of learning sponsors Ayala and Sarah Steinberg in the Schus of Refuah Shalema for Shulamis Basusha. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the Neshama Slav and Aliyah, the families in Nechama, and all those who require a refuah should have one together with Kol Chole Yisrael. And also with that, let us begin. Today's daf is Samech Vav 66, and we are picking up at or on Samech Beis 65b. An incredible Gemara ahead of us today. So we are picking up at the Mishnah on the bottom of Samech Beis, last Mishnah on the daf. Poschin la'adam b'ksuvas ishto. So we'll say, so remember again, this entire time what we're focusing on, the same topic, about what is a legitimate Pesach, right? What is a legitimate opening in order to allow for hataras nedarim, annulment of vows. So poschin la'adam b'ksuvas ishto. You could create a Pesach for a man through the ksuva of his wife. It was an interesting case. What's the case? Here, watch this. There was once a guy who made a neder that ultimately, again, that his wife can't get hana from him, or that he can't get hana from his wife. Nebo say, a neder like that, by definition, triggers divorce. Because again, if a husband makes a neder that he's not going to get benefit for his wife, or not give benefit to his wife, so the mice again, intimacy becomes prohibited, certain interactions become prohibited, so that triggers divorce. That triggers divorce. Now, so what happened? Vaisik suvasa taf dinar. Now, this lady had a generous ksuva. She had a ksuva of 400 dinarim. Okay. Uba lifnei Rabbi Akiva v'chayva litin lo ksuvasa. So the husband went to Beis Din to finalize the divorce, and Rabbi Akiva said, "Okay, you owe a ksuva of 400 dinarim." Amar lo Rebbe. He said, the husband says, Rebbe, ches meos dinarim hiniach abba. My father died. He left behind an estate of 800 dinarim. So what happened? Notal achi dalid meos. My brothers took 400 dinarim as their inheritance. Vani dalid meos. And all I have, I got 400 dinarim. So my entire inheritance, and apparently this guy didn't have money of his own, my entire inheritance ultimately again is 400 dinarim. So the Gemara says, so lo dai shatitol hi masayim vani masayim. So the husband was saying to Rabbi Akiva, listen, at least, help me reach a settlement, right? Give my wife 200 dinarim, my soon-to-be ex-wife 200 dinarim, and I'll give 200 dinarim. If I have to pay her all 400 dinar, then what? I walk out of this marriage penniless. Amar Rabbi Akiva, afilu ata mocher se'ar roshecha. Atanosin luksubas, a great line. Rabbi Akiva says, even if you have to sell the hair on your head, you do what you have to do to give her the ksuva, which essentially means Rabbi Akiva says, sorry, no luck. You owe her 400 dinar. That is the ksuva. That's it. There is nothing more to talk about. Amarlo, so listen to this. The guy says, Ilu hayisi odesha, who came, had I known that I was really going to have to pay her a ksuva of 400 dinar, Lo hayisi noder. I would have never made this neder. So as I will say, the guy understood that the neder was going to trigger divorce. But he thought that in the divorce settlement, he could get away with somehow paying just 200 dinar. He never thought that he would be stuck with the complete 400 dinar amount. So essentially he says, had I known, I would have never paid. I would have never made the neder. So what happens? V'iti Rabbi Akiva. I will say ultimately again, Rabbi Akiva permitted the neder based on this. And as Rabbi say, this was a Pesach. Had I known then that I would really be obligated to pay the full ksuva, I would have never made the neder. Rabbi Akiva said, that is a Pesach, right? That creates effective charata, and therefore ultimately again, the neder is annulled. Incredible story. Says the Gemara, here's what's interesting. What the Gemara is actually focused on is the hairline, right? Not the hairline, right? But the hairline. In other words, Rabbi Akiva is saying to the guy, even if you have to sell your hair, right, you have to go and pay the ksuva. The Gemara says, really? The Gemara says, metaltli mi mishtabdi l'ksuva. Actually, I'm sorry, before we get there. So we'll say, so here's what's interesting. The guy said to Rabbi Akiva, my father left me 400 dinarim. Now we'll say, the assumption is that literally, again, he left him 400 dinarim. Like cash or metaltalin. So we'll say, so the Gemara says, I don't understand, metaltalin mi mishtabli l'ksuvasa? Are metaltalin movable property? We'll say, in general, a ksuva only encumbers real property. A ksuva doesn't encumber movable property. So technically speaking, if he's got 400 dinarim of inheritance of metaltalin, that would not be meshubah to the ksuva. To which the Gemara says, Rabbi karka shava chasmeos dinar. So we'll say, no, because at the end of the day, actually what his father left him was not metaltalin, but rather was what? Was actual property, was actual land. Okay, so real estate is going to be meshubah to the karka. It's meshubah to the ksuva. V'hakatani se'ah rosho, u'se'ah rosho metaltali. But Rabbi Akiva said to the guy, to the husband, even if you have to sell the hair on your head, you are obligated to do so. Now we'll say, hair is metaltalin, right? Metaltalin. So how does Rabbi Akiva say to him that you even have to sell the hair on your head? Hachi kamar, afilu ata mocher se'ah roshecha v'ochel. No, we'll say what Rabbi Akiva meant like this. Rabbi Akiva was saying to the husband, listen, you have to pay the whole ksuva, which means even if you have to use the entire inheritance in order to pay the ksuva, you are obligated to do so. You're not going to have any money left for yourself. Rabbi Akiva says, okay, sell your hair. Sell your hair, that way you'll have money for your own food. So he wasn't telling the husband, sell your hair in order to pay the ksuva. What was he telling the husband? Sell your hair, so that's what? You'll be able to take care of yourself. You'll have money from somewhere. To which the Gemara will say, this is passing Shams Mina. We'll say, but what do you see from this? In Mesadrin Lebalchov. So we'll say, this is actually fascinating. What do you see from this, says the Gemara? That halacha l'maisa, when it comes to paying a ksuva debt, we do not care about how the debtor is going to sustain himself after the debt. I was supposed to say, this is an interesting halachic and also like hashkafa question. Someone owes money. They have enough money to pay the debt. But we know that once they pay the debt, what's going to happen? They're penniless. So there is an interesting machlokes. So I say, take a look at the first line at the Ran. Shamis mina ein misadron lebalchov pluktihi beparakam kabel ikaman damar demanichin lo mita umapos ukleim naso umasin yud beis chodesh the gamar miyak yakim erchin vikaman damar ein misadron. So I say, here's the shaila. When a person has money and he's going to pay off a debt, do we make sure that even after the paying off of the debt, he has at least enough money to live? Or do we say, no, not our problem. You owe the debt, you have the money to pay the debt, and what your financial situation is after payment of the debt is simply not our problem. So we'll say that's a machlokes. We call the machlokes misadron lebalchov or misadron. Misadron means like seder. Do we worry about the financial health of the debtor after he pays the debt? And therefore we'll say what that would mean is, maybe we restructure repayment a little bit differently. In other words, we'll say, so maybe instead of having him pay an entire life lump sum, we go ahead and we put him on a payment plan so that he's paying over a certain amount of time, but at least like this, he has what he needs to live. Or do we say, no, truth is, not our problem. Not our problem. So we'll say, so the Gemara says, what do you see from here? The fact that Rabbi Akiva said, remember again, we'll say, the husband in this case, what was he saying? If I pay off the ksuva, then what? I'm penniless. I have nothing. What did Rabbi Akiva say to him? Sell your hair. And I will say, now, by the way, sell your hair is the Talmudic equivalent of what? Go fly a kite, right? Go fly a kite, sell your hair. So, in other words, what Rabbi Akiva was saying is, listen, essentially, not my problem. Which I will say, by the way, isn't it such an interesting thing how sometimes in life, people have a problem, people have a challenge. And I will say, sometimes, the reflexive reaction is, what could we do to help? You have a problem, what can we do to help? And I will say, sometimes in life, the way you have to approach other people's problems is, you need to figure it out. I can't help. I'm sorry. It's hard, because essentially when we're young and idealistic, we want to fix everything and we want to fix everyone. I want to have a solution to everything. I think as we get older, we recognize I can't solve your problems. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. You borrowed the money, right? In this case, right? You have an obligation. You have to make good, and you're just going to have to figure this out. Now, conversely, I think most of us know, because all of us have kind of been in situations like that, where we've had a problem, maybe turned to someone for help, and the response we got was, go figure it out. And you know what the incredible part is? Some of the greatest life growth comes from figuring it out. As much as that hurts, when sometimes you feel like you needed help and you didn't get the help, what you get from having to rely on yourself and figure it out are they're moments of personalistic, explosive personalistic growth. Because now I have to figure it out. There's no lifeline. There's no lifeline. There is absolutely no one on the other end. But I have to do this on my own. So we'll say it says pretty incredible. So Gemara says, Rabbi Akiva seemed to be of the opinion, in masaj the balchov. No, pay it back, not a problem. The Gemara says, no. Amrav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Lomar, top of Samech Vav, Shein Mekan Shtachov. The Gemara says, no, not necessarily. In other words, it could be that we hold masaj the balchov. And perhaps what Rabbi Akiva was saying when he said sell your hair was look. In other words, we'll say, what was the husband trying to accomplish in this case? Right? Remember again, what was his objective? What was his objective? Reduction of the ksuva amount. Right? What Rabbi Akiva was saying is, listen, we are not reducing the ksuva amount. So again, we could figure out the payment plan. We could figure out a payment plan. But in other words, when Rabbi Akiva said, go sell your hair might not mean pay the whole amount right now. Go sell your hair means the ksuva, we're not reducing anything. This is what you owe. We can figure out how you can pay it in a way that doesn't sink you. But lamaisi, you're still obligated to pay. So Rabbi says, all the Gemara is suggesting over here is just there's this sugi itself doesn't point in either direction on the sugi of ein misajin l'balchov. So therefore, Rabbi say what we come out with over here is another form of Pesach, right? That you could create a Pesach ultimately again with the ksuva of one's wife. So Rabbi say that's the din of the Mishnah. That's the din of the Mishnah. And halacha, so Rabbi say we also learn about a fascinating machlokes about misajin l'balchov or ein misajin l'balchov. So Rabbi say, so just a fundamental machlokes. Do we worry about the financial health of the debtor after he pays back the debt or not? That's a fundamental machlokes. But ultimately, again, that machlokes is not really resolved or not really addressed ultimately through our Mishnah. I will say, I just will give you an interesting Maramakom. There is a fascinating rush. The first rush on the daf over Samach Vav Amid Aleph. Again, I will say, he just says, Kilomar, li'olam mesajid l'bachol, v'achi kamarlei, li'olam atachayiv lifro l'ksuva, mikol nechasim shi'avo li'adecha, v'afilu ata mocher seroshecha. So I'll say, so again, you'll read the rest of the rush. It's very interesting. But the rush is saying, could be that Rabbi Akiva wasn't saying that we're going to force you to pay everything right now, and therefore you'll have no money to live on. What Rabbi Akiva was just saying is, your attempt to reduce the ksuva is not going to work. Is not going to work. We'll figure out again what you need to sell, how you can sell a property while at the same time living. Okay, Mishnah. But I'll say, great case. Poschin b'yamim tovim b'shabbasos. Listen to this Erev Shabbos, Erev Shabbos case. Great. You could create a Pesach with Yom Tov and Shabbos. Now, I'll say, now what does that mean? Let's see. Now, first of all, we can actually take a look at the Ran, top Ran. Suppose can be Yom Tovim, Shomrim lo, Ila Hayisi Odeh, Sha'asr Le'tztar B'Shabbos, Hayiso Noder. So we're going to see, let's say a guy makes a neder that he's not going to eat meat or drink wine. And then we tell him, listen, now he comes to Shabbos, right? And he realizes, eating meat and drinking wine is such an important part of Shabbos. So we say to him, or Yom Tov for that matter, had you realized that you would cause yourself such tsar by missing out on Oneg Shabbos, enjoyment of Shabbos, Simchas Yom Tov, pleasure of Yom Tov, would you have made this neder? And if he says no, that creates a proper Pesach. So that's what it means. Poschin b'yom tov b'shabbosos. Berishona, and I will say, so that's the case. Now in the beginning, hayu omrim, osan hayamim mutarin, ushar kol yamim asurim. And I will say, so watch, let's play this out for just a second. I make a neder. And in my neder, I say, I'm not going to eat meat or drink wine. Then what happens? I come to Beis and I say, you know what? It's Shabbos and it's Yom Tov. I'm going to miss out on all the wonderful enjoyment of Shabbos and Yom Tov. So what happens? The Beis says to me, well, had you realized that you would miss out on Oneg Shabbos and Simchas Yom Tov, would you have made the neder? And I say, had I known then what I know now, I would not have made the neder. Beautiful. We'll say, what is that called? That's called the Pesach. That's called the Pesach. That allows for Ataras. So we'll say, so now the shaila is, so what's revoked? What's revoked? So in the beginning, they thought, what's revoked? Shabbos and Yom Tov. So now I could eat meat on Shabbos and Yom Tov, but the neder is still in effect for what? For the rest of the time. Ad Sheba Rabbi Akiva, until Rabbi Akiva came along and he said, "V'limin," and he taught, no, neder shan neder shehoter mechlalo hoter kulo. Until Rabbi Akiva came along, and Rabbi Akiva said, not true. Rabbi Akiva taught that a neder, once you permit part of it, the entire time. I was say a neder is an all or nothing proposition. Either you're bound by the neder or you're not. There's no such thing as being released from components of the neder. So once there is a Pesach for Shabbos and Yom Tov, the entire neder falls. Shan neder shehutar mechlalo hutar kulo. Once some component of the neder is nitar, becomes permitted, the entire neder falls away. So we'll say, what's the case? Here it is. Konam. So he gives an example. I will say, the Gemara is giving an example of neder shehutar mechlalo hutar kulo. Once part of the neder becomes part of the whole, how do you? So what's an example of this? Amar konam she'ini neder lekulchem. Let's listen to this. Right? I make a neder to this group. Right? Konam. I make a neder that I'm not going to get hana. Right? I'm not going to give hana any neder lekulchem. I'm not going to give hana to any of you. Hutar echer mehem. So we'll say, if I do hataras nedarim, I revoke the neder for one of the members of the group, then what? So hutar kulan. Ultimately, again, everyone becomes permitted. That's the example, because we'll say, why? I made the neder to a group. Once one part of the group becomes mutter, by definition, the entire neder falls away. Sheni neneh lezeh ulezeh. Now we'll say, however, what if I say, I take a neder, I'm not going to get hana from you, and from you, and from you, and from you, then what? Hutar harishon, hutar kulan, hutar acharon, ha'achron, hutar kulan asuran. So we'll say, this is interesting. We actually had this case before. So we'll say, there's a discussion in the rush over here, how exactly I'm phrasing this. Am I saying, I make a neder not to get hana from you? Does it have to be and from you, and from you, and from you? Or is it just from you, from you, from you, from you, from you? Either way, the Mishnah seems to say that what I'm doing is I'm linking all of the Nedarim together. One is linked to the other. And therefore I will say, what happens? If I go ahead and I know the Neder that I made to the first guy, then what? It's like a domino effect. Everyone becomes permitted. However, Hutra Acharon, if I only do Ataras Nedarim for the last guy, then what? Ha'acharon mutar v'kulan asurin. Ultimately, only the last guy is mutar, but again, his release from the neder doesn't affect anyone before him in the chain. Similarly, in the parentheses, I will say, if I go ahead and I do Ataras Nedarim for the guy in the middle, then what I will say? That affects him and what? Everyone below him, but everyone above him, so to speak, is unimpacted. Shigmar says, Shani neder zekarban ula zekarban. So we'll say, so what happens if I say, listen to this. I say, right, Ruvain, I'm not nana. You are to me like a carbon. Shimon, you are to me like a carbon. Right? Lev, you are to me like a carbon. So we'll say, what am I doing in this case? I'm making a separate lashon of neder to each of these guys. Then what? Pesach l'chol echad ve'echad. Then I will say, they're not linked. They each have their own independent neder or isser hana. And therefore, again, I need a Pesach, I need a hatara for each of them individually. Konam yain shani toim. We'll say, listen to this case. Great cases. Konam shani toim. So listen to this. I make a neder. Wine is konam to me. I'm not going to taste wine. Why? Shayayin rala me'ayim. Because wine is bad for the intestines, for the stomach. Now we'll say, so what am I doing in this case? I'm making a neder, but I'm explicitly articulating why I'm making the neder, right? I went to my doctor. He tells me I'm having some stomach issues. He didn't tell me not to drink wine, but I went on WebMD. I saw, right, that wine is bad. Wine is bad for the stomach. So I'm making a neder. I'm not going to drink wine because wine is bad for the stomach. Okay. Amrulo. So I'm at the Kiddush and they tell me, by the way, aged wine is actually very good for the stomach. So we'll say, what's that halacha? Chuter b'miyushan. I'm allowed to drink aged wine. Not only am I allowed to drink aged wine, but what? But rather, rather we'll say I'm allowed to drink all wine. Now we'll say, now what's happening over here? I will say, now in this case, what we're going to see, is, good. Yes. Okay. We'll see the explanation of this case. But I will say this can be a little bit different because this really seems to go back to what we're talking about a neder betos, right? About a mistaken neder. That's really what's happening over here, right? Again, in other words, I made a neder with a certain body of knowledge. Actually, with a certain assumption. What was my assumption? That wine is bad. I find out that wine is not bad. Therefore, the Gemara says ultimately again that the neder falls off. Now again, I will say that type of neder, remember again, is annulled even without a revocation process. It's not annulled. It's just what? It's just void. It's just void. There's no revocation process because as we saw in yesterday's daf, a neder betos is just not a neder. A mistaken neder is not a neder. Okay, let's go back there. So the Gemara says, Konam basal shani toim shabatzal radalev. I'm not going to eat onions. I hereby make a neder. Onions are konam to me because onions are bad for the heart. Amrulo, halo akurfi yafalalev. But then I hear some information, but the kufri onion is actually very good for the heart. So I'll say, what's the halacha? Hutar b'kufri. I'm allowed to eat kufri onions. Not only that, v'lo b'kufri bilvad hutar. Not only kufri onions, ella b'chala b'tzalim. I'm actually allowed to eat all onions. Why did I say once again? This is a case of neder bitos, right? I made a mistake in the neder. I will say a case like this once happened, and Rabbi Meir actually allowed the vower to eat all onions. Good. Let's analyze. So the Gemara says, Hutra achron, ha'achra mutar, the kulan asuran. So let's remember again, the Mishnah is jumping on the case over here, where I said, Konam, Lezeh, ulezeh, 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 ulezeh. So there are 10 people in front of me, and I say, I'm not getting hana from you, and from you, and from you, and from you, and from you. So we'll say, what's the halacha? If I'm matter the neder for the 10th guy, then who does that impact? The 10th guy and no one before him. So we'll say, Mantar, whose opinion is Amar Rava, Rabbi Shimon, the Amar, at Shimon Shvuah l'chol echad ve'echad. We'll say, ultimately, again, this is Rabbi Shimon, because Rabbi Shimon said that halacha l'maisa. We'll say, if you look at the Ran for just a moment, the Ran is right by where the Gemara starts. Mantana, timidiktani lazek karban ulazek karban srichin pesach l'chol echad ve'echad. Alma de olam lo havi prata ela kimitkar karban akol chad v'chad. In other words, we'll say, who is the opinion who says that halacha l'maisa, the individuals are considered to be linked, unless, of course, you explicitly distinguish them one from the other? Konam lazek karban, konam lazek karban, konam lazek karban. That is the opinion ultimately of Rabbi Shimon. Good. Konam yain shani toim. So we'll say, remember again, next case in the Mishnah. A person says, right, wine is usher to me. Why? Because wine is bad for the stomach. So we'll say, so what did the Mishnah say? Then they tell me, by the way, good wine or aged wine is actually good for the stomach. So we'll say, what's the halacha? Ultimately, again, the entire neder is void. So the Gemara says, "V'seifok lei de'ein ra." So here's what's interesting. The way the Mishnah read was, I make a neder that I'm not going to drink wine, right? Why? Because wine is bad for the stomach. Then I'm told that aged wine is good for the, right? Is actually good for you. So the Gemara says, why do you have to get into that wine is good for me? I don't need to know that wine is good for me. I will say the only thing I need in order to make the neder void is what? That wine isn't bad. That's all. In other words, I made the neder with the understanding that wine has an adverse effect. All I need to be told is that wine doesn't have an adverse effect. You don't have to be told that it's good for you. To which the Gemara says, you're right. Rabbi Abba, va'od yafekatani. You're right. The reason the neder is void is because the neder is betos. It's a mistake. I made the neder because I thought wine was bad for me. It turns out it's not bad for me. That's why the neder is void, right? It's just a mistaken neder. The Mishnah just says in it, oh, and by the way, there's also an additional component, which is what? Not only were you wrong, but you were so wrong. So wrong. Sounds like a marriage argument, right? In other words, not only were you wrong, but it's the opposite of what you said, right? It's the opposite of what you said. In other words, not only is it not bad for you, right? But lamaisa, it's actually good for you. So the Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara says, fine. The Gemara says, good. It's the same idea. So I'll say the onion case, right? Remember again, I made a neder. I'm not going to eat onions. Why? Because onions are bad for the heart. Then it turns out that what? The kufri onion is actually good for the heart. So once again, I don't need onions to be good for me. I just need what? onions not to be bad for the heart. As long as we can prove that as being true, then L'maisa what Rabbi say the entire neder is a toast. To which again the Gemara says, Rabbi Abba, you're right. The reason the neder is ultimately void, is because I made a mistake. Onions are not bad. The Mishnah just adds in, and by the way, in addition to onions not being bad, a kufri onion could actually have a beneficial effect. Incredible. Mishnah. So here we go. Fascinating. Listen to this. Another way to make a Pesach. We can make a Pesach for a person using his own dignity or honor or the dignity of his children. I'll say, for example, Omrim lo la'adam. We can say to a person, so we'll say, by the way, just take a quick look at the Ran, because the Ran will help to frame this case. It's 3 lines up from before, the last 3 short lines in the Ran. Poschin la'adam b'chvod atzmo, hamadris ishto. So we'll say, here's the case in question. A person makes a neder on his wife. Madris ishto achi gashana. So we'll say, so paradigmatic example of this, a man makes a neder, you cannot get any benefit from me. That's the neder he makes. Rabbi says, we saw before, what happens when you make such a neder like that? What happens when you make a neder like that? Triggers the obligation for divorce. So what happens? So look, finish the Ran. So we'll say, now watch this, go back to the Mishnah. So we'll say, a man made a neder that his wife can't get hana from him. That triggers the need for a get. So he could create a Pesach by him, and we say to him, Omrun lo, ila yisiyodea. Now we say to the guy, Reuven will call him, right? So Reuven made a neder against his wife Rachel that she can't get hana from him. So now we say to him, Reuven, how do you realize that as a result of this neder, you're going to have to divorce your wife, and therefore what? They're going to say about you now tomorrow, this is Reuven. Reuven's a divorcer. Right? Reuven's a divorcer, right? Reuven's a guy who just leaves his family, divorces his wife. You own about your daughters, they're going to say, Benos Krushos. The daughters now are going to be the daughters of a divorcee. Ma son, Iban shal Eilis Garish. People are going to cast aspersions on your wife. What did Mrs. Reuven, right? What did Rachel do? That's now causing Reuven to divorce her? So we'll say, what they tell Reuven is, listen, divorce now opens the door for people to speak badly about your family. Just an unfortunate, tragic reality. To this very day, a tragic reality. So you say to Reuven, had you realized that now you're opening the door for people to talk about you, for people to talk about your ex, for people to talk about your children, right? Reuven, you're opening that door by making this decision, right? Had you known that this was going to happen, would you still divorce your wife? What's the second wide line? Reuven says, you know what? Had I known this, I would not have made the neder. Right? Had I known this, I would not have made the neder. Hare ze mutar. So we'll say, ultimately, again, that is a proper Pesach, and that allows for the revocation or the annulment of the vow. So we'll say, so again, essentially what Reuven is saying is, had I known then what I know now, I would have never made this neder. That is a proper Pesach. Incredible. Konim shani nosies plonis kuura. We'll say, this is such a profound Gemara. Listen to this. Right? Reuven has suggested a shidduch with Rachel, and what happens? He doesn't want the shidduch. So we'll say, so what happens? He's so resistant to the shidduch that he does what? He makes a neder, and he articulates why he made the neder. I'm not marrying this. Reuven says, I'm not marrying Rachel. Why? Kura. She's not pretty. Kura means a stronger lashon, but I will say it's hard to use that lashon by any human being, right? So again, she's kura. She's very unpretty, right? Very unpretty. Vahari hina. Now it turns out she's very pretty. Or he says, ultimately, I'm not marrying her because shchora, she's dark complexioned. He wants a light complexioned girl. Vahari hi levana, and she's light complexioned. Or kitsara. Ultimately, and he says, I'm not marrying her because she's short, very ruka, but she's tall. So mutarba. Rabbi said in all of these cases, he's mutar to marry her. Now why? It's not because Rabbi said she was unpretty and then became pretty, or she was dark complexion became light complexion, or she was short became tall. Rather, ela shaned or tall. So Rabbi say, so just to be clear, we saw this in yesterday's daf. The Gemara quoted this Mishnah. This is the paradigmatic example of a neder tos. He made a mistake. Reuven says, I'm not marrying this girl. She's short. It turns out that Rabbi say, she's tall. Not that there was like some miracle, right? You know, she said to him or something. In other words, it was right. It was just a mistake. Right? It was just a mistake. So Rabbi say, so this is a neder tos. And therefore, Rabbi say, what do you have to do? What do you have to do in order to repeal a neder tos? What do you have to do? Nothing. It falls on the side by itself. Rabbi say, listen to this. So Rabbi said there was once a story like this of a man who was proposed to shidduch with his niece. Rabbi said, it sounds strange to us, but it was a common practice, right? Avram Avinu married his niece, so it was Avram Avinu's niece. So I'll say so again. So there was once a shidduch that was proposed between a man and his niece, and the man did not want to marry her. Did not want to marry her. So we'll say to the point that he made a neder prohibiting himself from getting any hana from her. Okay? And I will say, now from the story you see that the reason he made the neder, ultimately, again, because she wasn't pretty. She wasn't pretty. So it says, Rabbi Shmuel. So Rabbi Shmuel brought the girl into his home, and he made her pretty. You'll see in just a moment, this made her pretty. Amrlo Rabbi Shmuel b'ni mizuna darta. So listen to how beautiful this is. So Rabbi Shmuel then brought the girl before the man, and he said, tell me, is this the girl you didn't want to marry? Amrlo lav. He said, Rabbi, no, that's not her. That's not her. So Rabbi Shmuel made her look so beautiful. And ultimately, I suppose say, so by the way, I just want to point out, this would also be pashtos be a neder tos. Vitirua. And ultimately, again, Rabbi Shmuel went ahead and permitted the man to marry her. Shabbos Vitir Rabbi Shmuel. Both listen to how beautiful this is. In that moment, Rabbi Shmuel cried and he said, Benos Yisrael na'os hein. So we'll say, we're going to see that again. Remember, Rabbi Shmuel, just so you understand, so Rabbi Shmuel, this is Rabbi Shmuel Kohen Gadol, right? Rabbi Shmuel Kohen Gadol lived at the time of Hadrianic persecution. He was one of the Asar Harugei Malchus. So Rabbi Shmuel said, every Jewish woman is pretty. But what happens? Poverty, suffering, adversity sometimes deprives them of their beauty. So Rabbi Shmuel, it was just what a story. What a story, right? So Rabbi Shmuel sees a girl. Rabbi Shmuel sees a girl who is so beautiful. Rabbi Shmuel sees a girl who is so special, but because of adverse circumstances, her beauty has been stripped away. And what does he do? He brings her into his home. Whatever he did, he fed her, he clothed her, he bathed her, whatever he had to do. But he restored her beauty to her. Rabbi Shmuel says, because Jewish women, Baruch Hashem, possess such an incredible beauty. It's just sometimes the adversity of their circumstances strip them of that beauty. Ukeshemeis Rabbi Shmuel, when Rabbi Shmuel died, Hayu benos Yisrael nosos kina. Specifically, the Jewish girls cried. Va'omros benos Yisrael Rabbi Shmuel b'chana. Right? The Jewish girls said about Rabbi Shmuel, we have to cry over his loss. I will say, because Rabbi Shmuel took an interest in making sure that the Benos Yisrael, the Jewish girls, were restored to their beauty. V'chinu omer v'shal, Benos Yisrael ha'shal b'chena. Also, you see a similar thing by Shaul, that when Shaul died, it was said the daughters of Israel cried for us. So I'll say this was the Maisa with Rabbi Shmuel. Again, we're going to see a little bit more in just a moment. So the Gemara says, Maisa listar is the story. I don't understand. Is the story. The story seems to contradict the Gemara. Now, I was about to say, if you look at the Ran, 3 lines up from the bottom, Maisa listar, Heich maybe Maisa listar devar of the Meikara katani dekura venasis na asar ubasar achi katani Maisa. So again, from the Mishnah, it sounds like if a woman was unpretty and then became pretty, in other words, then ultimately again, that's not a Pesach for the neder, because we're about to say if she was unpretty and became pretty, what do we call that? No lud. B'pashtos, it seems to be the majority opinion says that you can't create a Pesach with no lud. So what's going on over here? To which the Gemara is supposed to listen to this. Chisrei mechsra. There's a piece missing. What's missing? Bachi katani. Rabbi Shmuel says no. Afilu ki'ura v'na'ases na, shechora v'na'ases labana, kitzara v'na'ases haruka. Rabbi Shmuel happens to hold as follows. Rabbi Shmuel holds that halacha l'maisa poschin b'nolad. That's what Rabbi Shmuel says, poschim b'nolad. That Rabbi say ultimately you could create a Pesach with brand new circumstances that have come about. That even if ultimately she wasn't pretty, but became pretty, she was dark complexion, but became light complexion, she was short, but somehow became tall, right? So the Ma'aser Rabbi Shmuel holds that even with no lud, new circumstances that were not present at the time the vow was made, ultimately that could create an opening, a Pesach for Hataras Nedarim. Incredible. And tells the story. Ma'aseh be'echad shenadar mibas achoso v'chnisu lebeis Rabbi Shmuel v'yafiyah. And I will say that's the story of no lud. That's the story of no lud. She wasn't pretty. She was not pretty beforehand, right? And what happened? So in other words, I will say this wasn't a neder b'taos. It wasn't the pshat that the man thought, oh, she wasn't pretty. In other words, the Mishnah gives an example like that of a man who says, I'm not marrying this woman because she's not pretty. Because she's not pretty. And then it turns out that what? He made a mistake. That's not this case. The case over here is she wasn't pretty. And Rabbi Shmuel took an active interest in her, helped her, and made her pretty. This is a case of nolad. And Rabbi Shmuel allows, ultimately again, hataras nadarim through a Pesach of nolad. So the Gemara says, Tana, how did Rabbi Shmuel make her pretty? Rabbi says, it's so beautiful. Shein toteves haisala, v'haisala Rabbi Shmuel, shein shal zahav. So Rabbi say, she was missing a tooth. She was missing teeth. So Rabbi say, this is incredible, by the way. What did Rabbi Shmuel ultimately again do for her? Cosmetic dentistry. Cosmetic dentistry. Because I will say the truth is, again, if a person, this is, by the way, from dentists need to capitalize on this. This is good marketing from the daf. So I will say, so again, because remember, what gives you, it's really true, what gives you confidence? On the most basic interpersonal level, what gives you confidence? Your smile. If you're self-conscious about your smile, you're self-conscious about your teeth, it's very hard to go ahead and give off an air of confidence. It's so dramatically true. So what happens? This girl was missing a tooth. She was missing a tooth. So what happens if a young woman is missing a tooth? So by pashtos, she's not going to smile. If she's not going to smile, we'll say, what do people think of her? Introvert, unfriendly. Meanwhile, she's just totally self-conscious about her smile. So the Gemara says, so what did Rabbi Shmuel do for her? V'asla Rabbi Shmuel shein shal zav. Rabbi Shmuel gave her a gold tooth. Now, both say, b'pashtos, it must have been white gold, right? Because I don't know, like a gold tooth. I don't know. Sounds like a little whatever. No, so the nice again, it must have been a white gold tooth. But the nice, I must say, that's incredible. Rabbi Shmuel gave her cosmetic dentistry, gave her a smile, allowed her to feel confident. And I both say, by the way, according to this approach in the Gemara, the only thing Rabbi Shmuel did for her was what? Was just give her cosmetic dentistry. That was it. That hurts. When the man said, I'm not marrying her because she's unpretty, the unprettiness that he was probably referring to, it could have been that he saw the missing teeth, or it could have been that he just felt she never smiles. And if a human being, if a woman, man, anyone never smiles, there's no chaim, there's no beauty. So Rabbi Shmuel, cosmetic dentistry, and ultimately, again, restored her beauty. Incredible. So the Gemara goes weiter. Kishacha Rabbi Shmuel, when Rabbi Shmuel died, pasek aliyahu sapdana. So I'll say there was a person who was eulogizing and said, Benos Yisrael al Rabbi Shmuel bechina hama bishchen. So the eulogizer said, Jewish women, Jewish girls, you really have to cry for Rabbi Shmuel, because Rabbi Shmuel, we'll say, isn't this incredible? Rabbi Shmuel made sure that every single Jewish girl was pretty. To whatever he could do, which I will say, because you know what the interesting thing about beauty is? So the interesting thing about beauty is Rabbi Shmuel recognizes the beauty is always there. Just sometimes the beauty needs to be tweaked, right? Needs to be tweaked. Also, men need to be less shallow. But lamaisa, right? But that's the unwritten part of the story, right? But lamaisa, again, the beauty is there. Rabbi Shmuel said, all you need is someone to take an active interest in you to help you. It's so beautiful. I'll say, by the way, I know we don't have time for it, but I just have to tell you something like that is just ridiculously, amazingly beautiful. I will say on that phrase of Benos Yisrael knows. And I will say, right, in the Mishnah, and then we're going to get into the stories. In the Mishnah, Rabbi Shmuel made a statement. What was his statement? Benos Yisrael knows. Benos Yisrael are beautiful. Elisha anios minavalton. How do you translate it? Anios, poverty, minavalton. Minavalton means almost like, nivel means like degrades them, diminishes their beauty. And I will say, get ready for this. Get ready for this. The great tzaddik, Rav Menachem Mendel of Rimanov, said that there's another way to read that phrase. Benos Yisrael nosim. Benos Yisrael, says the Rebbe, means also Klal Yisrael. Klal Yisrael, just like Bnei Yisrael can mean Klal Yisrael. Benos Yisrael also means, again, we're like children of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, sons and daughters to Hashem. Benos Yisrael, the Jew is beautiful. So what happens? Ela ha'anios. Get ready. Here it is. Ready? The anios, I will say, you spell anios with how? With an ayin. But I will say, it's vocalized the same way as if you put it with an aleph. I will say, what is anios with an aleph? Anios means egocentricity. Anius, the me, the anios, being about ani, making life all about me. Egocentricity, self-centeredness. All I worry about is what I want to do, what makes me happy. I don't care about the other. I don't care about my fellow Jew. I don't even care about what Hakadosh Baruch Hu wants. Ha'anios minavalton. You know what makes a person ugly? We know what degrades, what strips away all of the beauty is anios, me-ness, I-ness. When everything becomes about me, Abosai, is that not the most incredible thing you've ever heard in your life? Benos Yisrael Me'osheim. Every single Jew is beautiful. There's no such thing as an unpretty Jew. There's no such thing. Every single Jew is beautiful. Every single Jew possesses such incredible spiritual beauty. The problem is, we often become so wrapped up in ourselves, the aniyos, with an aleph. Everything becomes about me, the egocentricity, the self-centeredness, and that's what removes all of my beauty. When everything in life becomes about me, when everything in life becomes about the I, that deprives me of every single piece of my spiritual beauty, which tells me that if I want to become beautiful, which we all want to become spiritually beautiful, I will say, it requires a profound focus on the other and a profound focus on the needs of the other and of the needs of the Ribbon Shalom. A little less I and a little bit more of the other. Incredible, incredible. I would not be able to sleep tonight if I did not give that over to you before the end of this year. I will say, says the Gemara, great. And also tomorrow's daf is short. Yeah, very, very, very short. We should just stop here and have coffee. Right, so again, let's go like this. Let's go. The Amrali Lidvisu. The will say, a man said to his wife, Konam shiatnes the ashititami tavshilech Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Shimon. So we'll say. So now we're gonna see some interesting stories about some fascinating marital dynamics. So there was a guy who said to his wife, right? You are not allowed to get any hana from me up until unless you go ahead and serve your food to Rabbi Yehuda and to Rabbi Shimon. I will say it could be that like the backdrop of this story might have been that she was such a terrible cook, right? That he needed other people to understand the suffering that he was going through, right? Or the other piece was he was just a jerk. In other words, that's not the Ran or the Rush or anything like that. That's my Rashi on this. I was going to say sometimes again, and you'll see why that's important in just a moment. Could be that he was just a difficult guy. In any event, he makes this outrageous neder, which is an outrageous neder, right? Konam, you cannot get hana from me until you go ahead and serve your food that you cook to Rabbi Yehuda, to Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Yehuda time, Rabbi Yehuda ate the food. Fine. He said, Amar Kadu Chomer, Uma laso shalom bein ish leishto, Amar Torah shemi shenichta b'kedushi machal ma'imarim b'safek v'ani al achaz kama v'kama. So I will say, so what happened? Rabbi Yehuda said, fine, I'll eat it. Now, what was Rabbi Yehuda say? It's obviously very degrading, right? This lady walks into the base medrash with her pot of food. She says, here, taste this. So Rabbi Yehuda says, Rabbi Yehuda must have understood, or either she divulged him or he understood what was going on. He said, listen, in the case of Sota, whose woman is suspected of adultery, her husband brings her to the Beis HaMikdash, right? And there's a whole process. And part of that process is what? There's a piece of parchment with the name of Hashem that is dissolved in water that she has to drink. If Hashem allows his name to be dissolved for the sake of affecting shalom between a husband and wife, then I could taste some food. I will say a very, just what we learned. No anios in this, right? A very humbling statement. If God could humble himself to make shalom in a marriage, Rabbi Yehuda says, I could humble myself to help make shalom in a marriage as well. Rabbi Shimon lo time. Rabbi Shimon, on the other hand, would not go ahead and eat the food. He would not go ahead and do it. Right? He said, Yamusu kol b'nei almana. So let him literally again, let this entire family die. Let's have Va'al Yozus Shimon Mimkomo. But Shimon is not going to go ahead and move from his place. So we'll say, Rabbi Shimon refused to eat the food. Now, what's the pshat? So we'll say, if you take a look, Va'od Kihechi. So I'll say, Rabbi Shimon felt that no, this was a disparagement to Talmidei Chachamim, which is a disparagement to Torah. In other words, we'll say, this is not just this guy embarrassing his wife, this is this guy humiliating Talmidei Chachamim as well. And Rabbi Shimon says, at a certain point in time, Talmidei Chachamim have to take a stand to preserve Kavod Torah. Because the moment that Kavod Torah is totally and fundamentally degraded is the moment that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is degraded. Torah itself is degraded. So Rabbi Shimon said, no, not going to do it. Not going to do it because it in and of itself is a degradation of Torah. And furthermore, again, if we do this, then ultimately, again, we are enabling and maybe even on some level encouraging this type of errant behavior. Rabbi say, take a look at the Rush for just a moment. The Rush is in left-hand column. Val Yazashim Komo Lezalza B'Kvot Torah. So V'Lo Dami Lashka Sota Shekina La Baila L'Shem Shamayim Al Shera B'Shai Saver. And Rabbi Shimon said, you can't compare this to Sota. Why? Because Rabbi say in Sota, there is some element of suspicion. Remember, Rabbi say, what's the process of Sota? The process of Sota is a man says to his wife, don't be alone with this guy. And then what? She's alone with him for long enough for something to have occurred. There's something going on over here. Maybe not adultery, but there's something wrong over here. There's a process, then that's triggered. Rabbi Shimon said, no, this is just totally inappropriate. And because it's totally inappropriate, I am not going to be a party to it. And therefore, again, he refused to eat. So I will say, just pointing out, it is, who's right? Right? Who's right? So again, I will say, Rabbi Huda's position seems so beautiful. Willing to go ahead and essentially suffer indignity to go ahead and preserve Shalom Bayis. So I will say, but Rabbi Shimon is right also. There is the ability to suffer indignity, but there are some things that are just bigger than any individuals, like Kavod Torah, Kavod Talmidei Chachamim, Kavod Hashem. Those are pillars upon which our entire people are built. And the truth is, if they're degraded and eroded, Klal Yisrael is degraded and eroded. So we'll say, so what's fascinating about this case is, you really needed both of them to each take their respective course of action. Because we'll say, I learned two things. Number one, to humble oneself for the sake of the greater good, but also sometimes to stand your ground for the sake of the greater. We'll say, isn't that incredible? Two lessons. Sometimes I have to humble myself when that is necessary for the greater good of Klal Yisrael, in this case, the Shalom of Klal Yisrael. Sometimes I have to stand my ground for the greater good of Klal Yisrael. Which one is right, when they're right, who they're right? I will say, obviously, that's going to be a case-by-case situation. I will say, shkoyach. All right. All right, Chav Ranzim, have a great day, everyone. A good Shabbos. What do you, Michael?